mess with something that is square and what a square can do. Hello, Lu Lalo. I'm not sure what I'm going to draw, so I might mess with this being a square and what a square can do, or what cube can be implied to do. Maybe I mess with maybe it's just a weird spiral sort of deal. That's sort of like I have this element that's a full sort of spiral. Maybe it has to be more. And then the idea is that this sort of pushes. I don't think that'll work. This is me doing a loose planning, which kind of helps to convey some thought process a little bit to an audience. I want to have this thing sort of slithering. But I also don't want to have to commit quite as much time or effort as I have on some previous things. But like if this guy's here, how can this guy move? Maybe it's just that it starts as a little square and then grows around, so it progresses and gets longer that direction, which isn't dissimilar from what I've been working on, but I could do it against a grid pattern. And then have it condense and land here. And slide back over. So it starts with a little dude here, and then it gets longer as it goes along. Could even be sort of in stages instead of one constant movement. It could be like stretch land, and then maybe that's interesting as a movement. I might mess with that. Okay, so do I have 1 inch pattern drawn somewhere? I feel like I should here. I do. So there's this guy. Let's get this sort of general shape outlined. What I need is a 3x3 square. Get it right about yay spot. And now, just going to outline that basic shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is just me having a prepared grid that's good enough for me to reference back to. So if we got this, and then the idea is it starts here, and it goes foomp, 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 and it has a little bit more of a punch to each sort of movement. So I'll be using more smears is the idea here. And then yeah, I think that's where I'll go with it. So next step that I'm gonna do is grab me some of these guys. This one will probably be a shorter animation, time-wise and such, and number of frames. So I'm going to do a test drawing of what would be the final. Double check that I am recording. I am going to move that mouse away so I don't accidentally click it. So I want this one to be flush with itself, as opposed to in the past where I've given a little bit of a gap. I'm going to do a straightforward version of this. Maybe what happens is it condenses, then it reverses. And so I'm able to do sort of two versions of stuff. Let's have this and something around here. Let me get this a little bit tighter. This will all be in the same position. And then I'll create an elongated guy here. So the idea is that this is a sort of final bit. I'm going to fill it in so I get a better sense of this sort of initial spot. That's something of a test guide. And the idea is that what happens is it starts this size, then it builds up to being this large. So it goes from this size, and then it condenses back to here, comes down, lands, and right now it's offset from here, and then we repeat in the opposite direction, faster probably, and a little bit more cartoonish second time through. Then it lands here, and then it comes down and returns to this original position. So I'm going to keep using this grid as a baseline. And we start just with Square Boy. Now Square Boy is going to squat out just a little bit. As he's preparing to expand in size. I can't read what that says. Hopefully it's not terrible. O2. To mess with some different sort of animation techniques with this. I'm using Sumi ink. The brand is Yasutomo. It's available in most art stores. You can buy it online pretty easily. It's a relatively common brand. Not sure, depending on where you're at, that might be a little bit different for accessibility. But I've never had trouble finding it, except for one time in Miami. They didn't have what I was looking for. Hello, Emin. Okay, so now we're switching a little bit. I'm going to start following this grid that I have in the background, because now it's going to start popping up hola in Argentina. Come on. It's not that high, is it? That one. Hello, Kira. That's what you said yesterday. Thank you, P-Article. Oh, particle. This one you'll be able to see various smears. So an animation smear, or multiple, is when you're doing animation and you're recreating or synthesizing motion blur in some way. Thank you, Motor Michelle. The amount of time it takes for an animation varies a lot depending on what it is. This one will probably take a few hours. To answer your question, particle, asking how long it takes to make a full animation. Length, complexity, those are the two main things that affect. how long something takes. But a couple seconds takes several hours to make stuff. Thank you, Orinka Gore Dizayani, for saying a nice thing. This one's going to be longer than I think. Maya Roman asked, what digital software do I use to animate? I use Photoshop and Premiere primarily. Those are my two go-tos for getting everything ready. What inspires my work? Just curiosity about form and conveying shapes and such. Repurposing concepts to artistic means. It's pretty broad, but it's a hard question to answer. Where did I study? I went to school at SCAD for graphic design. Most of my animation is self-taught or from watching and exploring things. There's a lot of good resources in the world with the internet and such. Not everyone will be open with their process, which is okay. But I like to try and be. studied graphic design at SCAD Atlanta. I think I already said that. Thank you, T. Aerosart. Now let's get some more smear sort of stuff going. How did I learn to do this? I learned basic animation through Flash and programs like that. And then it's a lot of self-taught things. I started rotoscoping more. But I've always done bits of animation just as like movement. And then as it got to be a little bit more representational, as time went on, and my patience grew, I explored more things. Practice looking at existing animation and what I want, what I like, and what I want to emulate from it. We've done 1 second. Do you create narratives with your animations? Typically, no. I've done little bits of stuff that might have hints of narrative qualities, but it's usually exploration of motion and stuff like that. Narrative things are a lot more sensitive and have to be more thought out than what I'm doing. More planning. And typically I don't do so much planning with stuff. It's just sort of like a little bit here and there. So I don't have the same basic skill set. I haven't developed those skills. The skills required to do a good narrative-driven animation. I've messed with the idea, but haven't really done too much specifically in that realm. Okay, now there's audio again. Thank you, Pasquella Franza. I'm using tracing paper. Someone asked, or Luke Brown asked, what paper are you using? I'm using tracing paper. Allophasylation. Thanks, Ulysses. Glad that. Oh, I said Isaac, but you might pronounce your name more of Isak. Sorry if that's wrong in any form, but I'm glad to hear that it's in Mexico. Not as much this face in particular, but I did some drawing recently that I thought looked kind of... Oh, you're in South Africa, Luke. That's exciting. I've never been... The only continents that I've been on are North America and Europe. And the only places in Europe I've been primarily Western Europe. I have been to Mexico. I have never been to Portugal. Not familiar with Azores as a place, or if it means something else. But that's exciting. Getting a diverse geography. Spain. Or wait, is that the same person? No, they're Portuguese. I guess because I had streamed sort of mid-afternoon where I am at, that I tend to get a decent number of European people because it's evening there. So people are done with work and such. Okay, islands from Portugal. So a lot of Spanish, Portuguese. I was looking recently at my insights for where people are based that are my followers, and it goes USA, then I believe Mexico now. It used to be England was the second most number of followers, but I think it switched to Mexico. Brazil is another one that tend to have a number of people following. I have been to Mexico, but it was pretty touristy. What I was doing, I was in Cancun. Went to Cozumel. I think there was someone earlier who said Argentina. So you might be a second, or not second, but an additional Argentinian view in things. A lot of Spanish speakers. I can try to speak some Spanish, but I don't know it all that well. I can read it. Puedo leer español un pequeño. Y puedo hablar más pequeño. Smaller. Oh, a second South African. I should have said menos, not más pequeño. Menos? Less? That's less, right? Don't know. Yo no sé qué casi es. Something, it is good. Gracias. I can say it with a more American accent. Gracias. Gracias. Thank you, Astronese. Astronese? I forget where you're from. Okay. Well, almost. Casi is almost. Okay. Creo que sabes más inglés que sabo español. Hello. Oh, in Iran. Lots of folks from different places. That's interesting and exciting. Most people who message me or talk and English isn't their first language, they're like, I'm sorry, my English is so bad. And I'm like, you know more English than I know any other language. So the fact that you're like going at it, it's pretty consistently true. Yes, seeing this is relaxing. Thank you for translating. I was like, what is ver? And ver is to see. To see this is, and I might have been able to figure out relajante. But it would have taken me a moment, and it would have just been because it's similar to relaxing. You don't have to apologize. You're speaking or typing good English. I forget if you speak Spanish. I could try to say it in Spanish. These take, where are we at? We're at about, I've been doing this one for about 50 minutes. They usually take a few hours. How much minimum time does it take for me to complete such an art piece? Okay, I was confused. There's, in the chat, there's a black heart, and I thought that there was something on the page. How many hours, so how much time minimum? If it's like an abstract animation that's just a few frames, I can do it within an hour's time. This one's a bit more complex and is following a more rigid guideline because it's going off of a grid, so things have to be a little bit more consistent, which means that it takes a bit more time because it's not as loose. It's still pretty loose, but just not as loose. Hello in Pakistan. I do not know any Arabic other than things like praise God. That is because people use it out of context. I don't think it's something that people consider. I don't know if you're Muslim, but there's a lot of context of using the term Allahu Akbar. It gets used a lot in the context of people doing more extreme things, but it's just like saying God be with you or something. Or actually goodbye is a contraction of God be with ye. It's just shoved together for English. So it comes from a very similar sort of origin or meaning. But hello in Pakistan. I have never been to Pakistan. What was I thinking? Oh, also, adios in Espanol, similar sort of thing. Because adios would translate to God. Or if you were to say like, thank goodness. It's like a variation of thank God. And that's what Allahu Akbar means if you're going for like a literal bit. For a 30-second video or a minute-long video, how many frames do you normally have to do? You see that I number them. I number them because it keeps things in order. And if I make mistakes, then I can target which one it is. I typically work at 15 frames per second, so 30 seconds is 450 drawings. 1 minute would be 900 individual drawings. I keep that up. I don't really do pauses because I don't like how it looks. Do I make keyframes? I don't really use keyframes. I kind of do here and there, just for testing. Term keyframe is from traditional animation, where it would be the key frame, the most important frame in a section. And it's sort of, animation traditionally works in broad strokes that refine more and more. So in traditional animation, you would start with storyboards, where you have like a selection of images that are drawn out that's just like conveying the loose story of what's happening. So it would be like you have a guy here, and then you might have a different scene sort of cut storyboard, and you might have arrows to indicate where the motion is going to take place. And so you start with these broad elements, and then you would create animatics where you might have some digital or like major motion. So you might have like the arm up here and then show the arm down there, and it would be sketchier at that point in time. And then you would have it go to the animators that are doing the pencil tests, where with pencil and paper, they go through, and typically what you do with keyframes is you would, where you might have this frame and this frame, you might have a third or a fourth one that starts to illustrate it a little bit cleaner, and then you have people come back in and do the in-betweens, the tweening. So you're probably familiar with tweening as a term if you're talking about digital animation. Tweening nowadays is done largely digitally, where you just say, I have this here, and over here I have it here, and in the frames I want it to be filled in. But you would have lower or more entry-level animators that would come in and do the in-betweens. So the time you're doing the grunt work, sort of. You're coming in and filling in the gaps. So you start with, like, let's say you're doing frames 1 to 10. It would be like frame 1 and frame 10. And then you might do frame 1, frame 5, and then you have frame 10. And then you fill in the gaps. It's a lot easier to set out timing if you have these larger motions, or these keystones, the keyframes, the major points of what you need to accomplish. I got distracted when I was working on this because I need to start making this condense. So a lot of the terminology of digital animation comes from traditional animation. Storyboard is like an animatic. Storyboard is usually a little bit more broad, and you don't have any sort of motion conveyed. It's more setting up scenes, stuff like that, and it's used in different aspects of filmmaking and motion in general. So you have it in film, like you use storyboards. It's a way to convey concepts that are more complex, more cheaply and easier. This is ink. This is Sumi ink. SUMI. What age did I start animating? I did my first animations like in 5th grade. Which I forget what age that is. It's double digits, but I forget. I think it's like 11 or so, maybe 12. That's not this sort of style of animation. first animation I got more into was digital macromedia flash. Hello, Anita. Hello, Cesara. I usually do animation sort of straightforward, which isn't the most effective way for, especially if it's timed out to, yeah, it makes things easier if you're working in stages. Also, a lot of the time what you do is you don't work, like you don't draw the final figure or anything like that as you're working. You usually wouldn't work exactly how I'm doing. You would start with broad strokes, shapes, and you would draw to get a clear understanding of where things are moving, and then you refine it and refine it and refine it. It's like a sketch to a painting. I think that that's something that's intimidating for a lot of people and misleading, is people have the understanding that artworks start sort of much closer to their final stage than what is actually where things are. A lot of artworks are refined over time and take pieces of things rather than all at once. Some people can do that, but it's usually a lot of time. If you're using thicker paper than what I'm using and you want a clearer image of what's underneath, a light table is good. I don't like looking straight at a light table for an extended period of time, and I like tracing paper in general, and so I don't usually use a light table, but they're relatively cheap nowadays, and it's something that I think is worthwhile to buy just to mess with if you don't end up using it for animation outright. You can still use it for other elements, or when things are a little bit more complex and you need to reference a greater number of frames if you are using tracing paper, something that's that transparent, translucent. I'm not currently using a light table. This is tracing paper, so it's thin enough to where it doesn't need light from beneath in order to see from frame to frame. Do you cut your tracing paper to that size, and or do you punch the holes in each page? I do cut the paper down to size. I'm not sure what the actual size, it might have a name, but the tracing paper, when I found it in bulk, it usually is 12 by 9 inches, and so I cut it in half. Usually when it comes, it's about this size, or you can't see that, it's not wide enough, but it's twice this size. And then I cut it in half, and I try to keep You can be late. Appreciate you coming through and watching stuff as often as you do. And then I punch the holes in it, which is only it's not something I've done for a terribly long amount of time. I've done more where I just clip things down because it can be a little bit more precise. These aren't the most precise staying in place because the hole punch is like a 1/16 of an inch larger than these dowels, but 1/4 inch dowels are a lot easier to find than 5/16 inch dowels, and it is a lot easier to move things on. I'm less likely to tear the paper. But I do hole punch the paper. You can buy pre-punched paper, both that have 3 hole punches, and paper that is made and punched specifically for animating and placing on a peg bar. But I wanted something that was a little bit cheaper, and I didn't know how to find the hole punch that worked with a peg bar, and I didn't want to have to buy a bunch of paper and whatever. So this is just a standard 3-hole punch. I think the one I got was like $20 or $30. Oop, I said 30, so I started to write 3. And it's meant for punching like up to 40 sheets of paper at once, but I found more success in punching using up to 20 sheets. This animation is most recently I've been doing a number of more circular sort of animations, ones that are a bit rounder, and I wanted to mess with using a grid pattern and taking something that has a greater sense of being flat. Where the last one I did, I had something where the figure sort of twisted around like this, and add a little bit of dimension to it, trying to convey a bit of 3D space in a 2D space. And so this one is working with a similar sort of like twisting action, but in a much flatter, rigid thing. And so that's what this one's messing with. This one's also messing with more smears, animation smears. I don't really believe in horoscope stuff, but it's an interesting way to look at and explain things, contextualize stuff. That's not my primary interest. The sort of music I'm into, it's pretty varied. It's pretty broad. You can look at my Spotify, see stuff there. I've got some playlists that are out in the world. That's Can I Kicked It. Let's see, I could talk about how my musical taste shifted and changed over time, or got a little bit more broad. Growing up, my mom and dad listened to a lot of like folky stuff, singer-songwriter bits. It was a lot of James Taylor, Cat Stevens, Simon and Garfunkel, and also just Paul Simon. And then personally, I got more into stuff like They Might Be Giants because I am a semi-alternative, nerdy white dude. So it's required listening. They Might Be Giants was a good sort of cornerstone, specifically the album Flood. Cat Stevens no longer goes by Cat Stevens. I forget what he goes by now. But he converted to Islam and was actually on the terrorist watch list at some point. Yusuf something. But he got held from coming into the United States in like 2002 or something. And it was actually, he was on his way to talk with Dolly Parton about possibly, I think she had recorded Peace Train as a cover and was gonna possibly do another cover. Yeah, he converted to Islam and at some point, I forget, but it wasn't a super recent thing. And then in high school, I listened to, well, middle school, it was stuff like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Sum 41, starting to get into some elements of more classic rock. Stuff like AC/DC is what some people might say for classic rock. But then as I got a little bit older, I started looking at more history of things. I also have an older sister, and she was exploring different music stuff, so I got to sort of listen to those things earlier on. That's what I found with people who have older siblings. They tend to be introduced to music a bit younger. And so had that, but she was never as much into harder rock stuff. I got more into that and some earlier rock and roll by going through lists of things. Like more recently, Rolling Stone did a new updated version of their 500 greatest albums of all time, but I went through that and listened to a bunch of them. So that's when I was listening to more stuff like I got back into the Beatles, more older rock things, stuff like Buddy Holly and a lot of James Brown at that time. that was also when I started listening to a lot of Stone's Throw, older alternative hip hop, and then nowadays I've been listening to a lot more female singer-songwriter sort of stuff as I've gotten more comfortable in emotional states of things and exploring those stuff. So a lot of most recently stuff like last couple of years, stuff like Mitski, Angel Olsen, some more Fiona Apple, which I didn't realize I had listened to a lot of her music when I was younger, outside of stuff like Criminal and things. When I listened to Win the Pawn, that album has a super long title that I don't know offhand. And then, a lot of Stone's Throw stuff that came about because of DJ Danger Mouse did something called the Grey Album, which was a remixed version of Jay-Z's Black Album and the Beatles' White Album. And that was something that sort of gave me a personal sense of sort of permission to listen to more hip-hop. That was a bit more mainstream, and that's where I got more into stuff like Biggie Smalls and Wu-Tang Clan. Wu-Tang Clan made a lot more sense to me when I sort of contextualized it as like a punk rock hip-hop, because it's pretty like noisy and messy, but passionate and has interesting sort of vibes and feels, and it's much more of a DIY sort of aesthetic to it compared to something that's a bit more polished, because what I was peripherally aware of when I was younger was very polished hip-hop stuff coming out of the late 90s, early 2000s. Things that are very cleanly produced, stuff like Biggie Smalls, Puff Daddy, and then stuff that was getting more radio play, stuff like New Jack Swing. It had a lot more electronic elements to it and didn't seem as tangible, but stuff like Wu-Tang Clan had a lot more of a sense of texture to it. So I listened to the various Wu-Tang solo efforts, as well as a lot of 36 Chambers. And it was something a bit rebellious. I also was listening to a lot of things that I didn't realize until I tried to go through and find music I listened to in high school. A lot of indie rock stuff that sounds very similar in production. Stuff like Wolf Parade, elements of the Shins. I got into Modest Mouse in a big way for a while because of the album Good News for People Who Love Bad News, and the play that it got on MTV2. At that point in time, there was a lot of stuff going around that were bands that had "the" in the name. Perhaps the biggest at the time was The Strokes, but you also had bands like The Hives, The Vines, The White Stripes. The White Stripes probably have a longer sense of relevancy and legacy than The Strokes, because The White Stripes were a little bit more consistent with what they produced, and Jack Black was more experimental than, or maybe not experimental, but a bit more traditional with process and learning and exploring different areas of more tried and true musical genres, getting more into traditional American stuff, things like bluegrass, country, rock, blues, and being a little bit more studious than something like the Strokes, where the Strokes had studied or more explained stuff by like pop rock things. Where's my Sharpie? There's my Sharpie. And so they had a lot of stuff like I think it's a Tom Petty song that Last Night is basically a straight up version of. Mall Grab. I'm not sure what that's. Is it music or something? I've listened to a variety of things. I also got into various blues, more traditional things. Stuff like. I got into a lot of funk for a bit. Very big into Parliament Funkadelic stuff. Sly and the Family Stone. And then all the offshoots of those. High school, also very big into Talking Heads. I went to a midnight screening of Stop Making Sense, and that was like, oh, I know some of these things, and then it was like, all of this is very good. I'd like to get more into this. And so, okay, now someone asked, what do I like video games? And if so, what are my favorites? I do like video games. I've been doing some older games recently because I realized that there was a Xbox 360 I had never played that was given to me at some point, and so I went through and played the first Red Dead Redemption, Fallout New Vegas, and I started into Fallout 3 but haven't gotten that far in it. Got distracted because I have a PS4, Xbox 360, an old Xbox, like the original Xbox, a Switch, and I'm not using them, but I have a Wii U and a Wii, as well as a new Nintendo 3DS XL, like different model of DS that came about at some point. But I got distracted because with the PS4 I played the remastered version of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2, which I played those a whole lot on Nintendo 64, was what I had at some point. No longer have that console. But right now, I actually, as a gift recently, someone gave me a Game Boy Micro, and I played my old copy of Pokemon. I've also been playing Pokemon a lot on the Switch. I finally got the DLC because they put that newer update in there, and I had a friend who was talking about doing raid battles on there, and I was like, what's that about? He was like, it's fun, it's good, you should try it. And I did, and we have done raid battles. And also recently I got the Super Mario, like, I've been playing a lot of older games. I don't know if it's a sense of comfort with the state of things as they're going around in the world. but playing older games and having a different sense of awareness of qualities and such. But I've been playing Super Mario Sunshine. On my Game Boy Advance Micro, I've got a easy flash thing, so I've been playing older Pokemon games and a little bit of Wario Land 4. As far as newer games, I played through Red Dead Redemption 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last of Us, not the second one, I only played the first one so far. Spider-Man for PS4, which that's a very fun game. Trying to think. On Switch, played Pokemon, Untitled Goose Game. Celeste, Hollow Knight. Dead Cells. Dead Cells. Really like, I went through and saw what games were cheap when the PS5 was announced, because PlayStation did like a get some cheap things while we can still sell them to you sales. And so I got a variety of games, but I have not played a lot of them, which exactly what they like. I played BioShock for the first time and enjoyed that. It's weird going back and seeing what was like revolutionary and these founding elements of things and what gameplay differences it has and how limiting it feels nowadays, because the things like moral quandaries, having the opportunity to make choices that affect how your character is perceived, seem quite linear and limiting when you're going to older versions of it that were like the first example of something like that. Where BioShock, it's mainly like whether or not you choose to harvest the power from these children or to save them. And it's something where it's like you either do or you don't, and there's not too much outside of that, but there's a lot more complexity in newer games, but it's still sort of limiting, where it's like an understanding of this is good, this is bad. And you can research and play along with aspects of it, elements of it. I forget what else I got. But also around that time I got Burnout Paradise City, because I played a lot of Burnout 3 and 4 on Xbox. I really like arcade racers. I'm not a big fan of racers that are more like a sim. Gran Turismo. I don't really like driving. I have a license, but I never drive. And I don't want to drive in a way that feels realistic if I don't enjoy driving in general. So Gran Turismo is not my sort of game. I like arcadey games. I like ones that are sort of absurd with the gameplay. Thank you, Fazel. I'm not sure how to say your name. My apologies. Let's just say Faye. It's a nice thing to read. I don't have asthma. I'm just talking a lot. And my nose is a little stuffy. Maybe I have asthma, but I've had no indication of it. Hello. I have terrible posture when I'm working. It's not the best for good breathing. This one I'm coming up on 2 hours, and then I'll probably dedicate at least an hour to filling in the solids. Probably finish within 4 hours. Thank you, Sport, for enjoying the video. I've been enjoying the Game Boy Micro. I ordered a replacement battery for the Game Boy Micro. It plays fine, but I've been using a flash, an easy flash thing that emulates stuff, and it drains the battery a bit. And I'm curious if a new battery will significantly improve that, or if it's also gonna not do super well just because the emulation kills the battery faster. So curiosity. Emulation. I'm glad that it's soothing for you. I gotta get back to frame number 1. Soon, not immediately. Thank you. I think this is one that I printed. So it's a little bit larger and a little bit different quality. When I print stuff, when I personally print things, I push more ink through, which is fine for a design like this. More finite lines, more lines that have more definition or are smaller and thinner and more detail to them. Those don't work well if you're just pushing a lot of ink through, but I like pushing a lot of ink through because it gets a darker ink quality to it. But yeah, or you've done silk screen. This one was a silk screen, and it was dragging it a few times with the squeegee. I forgot you said that you worked with printing before. Also, I meant to send it earlier, but your shirt has shipped. Or it says it's shipped, which means it's probably like on its way to the post office or something. But should get to you soon. I'm not 100% where the printer is that printed the shirt. A lot of them are in a lot of the shirts come from North Carolina. And then some come from the Midwest. And then, I don't know if there are any production places closer to you, closer to the West Coast, but I can't read Chinese. Well, if you want more, and you want the same shirt style, then should be around the same price unless they change prices. It's like a very small change right now for holiday season, but it's like 25 cents or something, so I'm not bothering with shifting pricing elements. But that shirt's just the one that you requested. It costs more, so it's a little bit higher of a price. I do some silk screening here and there. I price it higher typically because of the labor costs involved on my end, and there's like a minimum that I have to produce in order to justify it. The last silk screening that I did, I think I might have done some personally, but there's a shop nearby that I use, but they've got a minimum order of 30, which is completely realistic. And I like slowly made the money back. Now I have a little bit more money to invest into that sort of thing, but digital is easier because I can update it quickly. They're doing the fulfillment, so I'm not dealing with shipping. I get slightly cheaper shipping rates if I'm doing it US based and I'm shipping it myself using shipping that I buy online or pay for online. But the labor involved in shipping as well, and cost of shipping materials adds up a little bit, and right now it's easier for me as I'm doing this sort of format to just do a shirt design per day and have that be entirely digital. And I'm not selling enough shirts to where the cost is more, it's not more cost effective for me to print silkscreen shirts. So right now, it's primarily digital bits. I don't have any tattoos. I'm not 100% committed to things in that sort of means. If they're limited in number, then it's a silk screen, most likely just because I don't have the screen prepped anymore. I could redo it for some of them, but a lot of them are done using drawing fluid and screen filler, so the design only exists in the shirt itself, as opposed to having a film to expose onto emulsion. And so if I'm doing drawing fluid, then I lose the shirt design. I can recreate it to a degree, but not exactly. So I suppose if you've done silkscreen, I don't know if you've ever used drawing fluid, but it requires less material. It's a little bit cheaper for the materials that you need for it, and it's you don't need as much equipment or storage stuff, where for emulsion you need an exposing unit, ideally. And the emulsion needs to be stored ideally in a colder location so that it slows the chemical reaction when you're not using it. Sometimes the ink will transfer if it's wet on the page. That's why I do this. I try to dry it, because you can't really see in the shot, but sometimes the ink is thicker in spots where usually when I lift the brush it's a little bit heavier of ink on there, so it dries slower, and if I look at an angle I can see that it's still reflective. So sometimes it picks up on the one above it, but it doesn't usually affect the look of things. A lot of the time you end up with just what looks kind of like an animation smear anyway, because it's like a ghost from the previous frame. Yep, that is one reason that I mostly, or someone saying that they, this is just for later viewing that doesn't have the chat visually there. Someone's saying that they've done silk screening but just prepping files for it, but not doing the screening or the printing themselves. And one reason that, if you're doing screen printing, you have to separate the colors for printing if you're doing more than one color, but I only ever do black on white, which means that I don't have to be as concerned with registration, which is another reason that I do black on white for printing. Hello, Neely. Neely E in the devotion. When you're screen printing and you have multiple screens you have to pull, multiple colors, you have to align those prints, or align the screens when you're printing them. This is 49. Good. however you want. I'm not perfect with things. I'll redraw stuff if need be. Generally everything's kind of loose, and so it's okay to make smaller mistakes. And also it's animation, and in animation things are only ever present for a fraction of a second. So those mistakes pass by quite quickly. I think I'm done. Oh, this is 52, not 50. Yeah, this is for the time lapse. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna lie down and crack my back. and have a handful of cheap zits. My favorite part is when it's done and I get to see the animation happening. Oh, Esteban. I like it a lot. I like a lot of things that have tomatoes in them. Salsas and sauces. But I'm not the biggest on raw tomatoes. Studied graphic design, but that also included like general art things. I don't know what specifically inspires me. It's hard to define those sorts of things. I really like Pas de Deux by Norman McLaren. Walking by Ryan Larkin. I like a number of Norman McLaren things. I like animation. I wanted to make animated things. It's exploring motion. And how things are perceived versus how they're actually created. The disconnect between something when time is slowed down and you examine it as its component pieces as opposed to the full piece. Animation, anything that's recreating something you experience, is doing so through tricks and illusions. Everything is based on some sense of perception, and how you're experiencing it dictates a lot of what your actual understanding of what the item is. Anytime you take a photo, there are so many different variables happening in that moment. I can't get the brush closer right now. It messes up the time lapse, and it limits where I can work in the space. Because I have to stay in frame, and I move things a lot more when I'm filling them in. And so I end up, if I get too close, it limits my movement, but it also, I get out of frame almost instantaneously, and then you're looking at nothing, or no active space. This is sort of the concession. If I was doing this as a one-off shot as part of a edited version that conveyed, I can't show it at the camera either because of positioning. If there's a set that is sort of stationary, it's a way that I can work without it being too invasive. If you go and look at some IGTV videos or some bits, I've got some that are examples of painting where it's got a different perspective, but this is just sort of the concession of perspective that I ended up with for doing live streams and recording those. It's easiest for me to come to this style and just sort of work within these general elements and then explore a little bit here and there. There's a comfort in that. I do other sort of styles in work, but it's not as refined. And it also doesn't feel as personal. So I'm not against using other styles, but I do so more in an experimental manner. Dipping my toes in the water. And oftentimes those experiments then translate into this sort of style and aesthetic. It's the feeling of like you don't know what something is for until 3 months after you learn it and you're like, oh, I can use that. Learning for the sake of unknown purpose. That's how I experiment a lot of the time. Or I might have a purpose, but it usually shifts a bit. I've been trying to draw daily. It's a learned thing, but I'm still surprised or disappointed at times with how something goes, and it's just a learning process. This one's a little bit more of an experiment because a number of the frames are smears, which can work super well sometimes, and then other times it's too chaotic. Nothing's in focus, so to speak. Thank you, Ajik. Sorry if I'm saying your name poorly. If you instruct me on how to say it, I'll try to say it better. That's very nice to hear. But also don't feel like you need to teach me how to say your name. Ajik. Okay, glad that I got it. Said something loosely like it first time, or maybe it's completely different. I think I tried to do the J to the T, so I did like budged. It's budge. Sick. Almost halfway. There's a lot of TZs in the translation of older Mexican. Oh. Or at least I have seen TZ sounds in a lot of older Mexican things because it was budge. I thought it might be. Yeah, it sounded loosely Indian. Like South Asian Indian. I always forget what the older name of Mexico City was. I don't know, as in the written out using the Latin alphabet, it has the T's and Z's in it. And then I forget the full name, but there's Mexican hairless dogs that just get called Xolo. It has like some T's and Z's for the full name that's pretty long. Excuse me. Sholoits. Every time I try, I've heard it said because I've looked it up more than once. Oh, there's the TZ in there. Sholoits Quintal. Quintile. There's no way for you to phonetically spell that out better than what it is. I just have to hear it again. So I just say Shola. Shola. It's the best I can get for those hairless dogs. I'm saying their names right now. I looked up that they were bred as like something of a personal heater. Like you could sleep with a dog and it would keep you warm. Because it was hairless, it gave off more heat. Don't have any work that is explicitly inspired by Mexico, by Mexican works, but I do like a lot of Mexican work. Mexican work tends to be, at least a lot of what I see is a lot more colorful. But something like this has some relationship to like Aztec sort of things, having a lot of harsh angles, geometric forms with abstracted things coming around it. So there's relationships. I don't have anything that's explicitly conscientiously inspired by specific Mexican artwork, but I also haven't spent a lot of time in Mexico, and what I have seen or spent time doing in Mexico is pretty are the Aztecs further south? Are the Mayans more Mexican? There are Mayan calendars and stuff that have similar sort of aesthetics to them. But I went to touristy things in Mexico, so I didn't get engrossed in cultural heritage sorts of things, but I enjoy various Mexican work that I see when it comes up, and I enjoy the somewhat meditative complexities of Mexican cuisine. That it's simple, but it's also incredibly complex. It's not complex in the sense of more European things, where the complexity is loud. There are very spicy and loud flavors in Mexican cuisine, but it's oftentimes somewhat softer. I don't know. I'm sort of going around things. It's also very old. I have a light box. I use it sometimes if I have a lot of frames that I'm referencing that I need to see clearly. But because I use tracing paper and I like the look and feel of tracing paper, that it's a bit more reactive to the ink, as in it warps the paper, so it exaggerates the interaction between the ink and the paper, more so than standard like this page. If I draw on it, it doesn't flex the paper as much because the paper is thicker. And so I like that element of tracing paper. If I put tracing paper onto a light box, it becomes like too transparent, so it's sometimes harder to discern what frame or what line is coming from what page, what piece of paper. And so it's easier to have it more obscured by just having whatever light. I did learn at some point that it is much easier to see through and see all the elements of things if I work against a purely white background. Because for a bit of time I did a lot more where I just had like a piece of brown chipboard, like the back of a tracing pad of paper, just a pad of paper. And sometimes it worked for most things, but sometimes it was difficult to see through because the contrast wasn't as pronounced. So I would just put a bunch of sheets of paper underneath it, and that helped. I haven't looked too much into the history of Mexican animation. I don't know if there's a lot of Mexican animation. I know that there's puppetry. I don't know how much animation there is. I know that there's a lot of 2D French animation. And then Japanese, but there's not too much that I know of outside of the US, France. There's some Canadian, but it's a little bit more experimental at times. Then there's a little bit rougher sounds. Belittling a little bit to say rougher animation, but there's a lot of more textural stop motion animation that comes out of a number of countries, because I think part of it is slightly more accessible, or at least a more literal one-for-one. There's some sort of creepy bits. Okay. Of things that come from some stop motion animation internationally. Stuff that's like the only one I can think of a name offhand is Pengu. I don't know if it's produced in Switzerland, but it's like a Swiss creation. He pops up in memes a lot. But I first found out about it when my dad studied abroad for a year in Switzerland, in Bern. And he met various Swiss folks, and we went and visited them when I was like 3. So I don't really remember too much, but I had some things that some toys and books that I got as a result of visiting. And Pingu, which is a penguin, is one that I got. So I know that that exists. I know that there's the Finnish Moomin, which I'm like, look at those hippos, but they're fairies, I think. Which I learned about, I think it was one of 2 people who first told me about Moomin. I think it would have been someone who is a family friend who went and studied in Helsinki. That's Finnish, right? Or is it Swedish? Anyway, Moomin is. I've not looked at Brazilian animation. I don't know too much about different histories of animation. I know that it might be Indian, or no, it's Chinese or Japanese, but there's a precursor to The Lion King that's very similar in story. I also don't know too much about any. It's very broad to say African, but African animation. I don't know if there are any feature-length animated films coming out of places, or I'm not familiar with feature-length animated films that aren't French, American, or Japanese. I know of more short films that are animation and animation adjacent that came out of the National Film Board of Canada. Grant-based things. But that's because I had a teacher that talked a lot about Norman McLaren. Or enough about Norman McLaren for me to be like, I really like this guy. And then look into his other works. He produced a decent number. Most of those were for the National Film Board of Canada. But Norman McLaren was actually born in Scotland, I think. I've gotten better at drawing and talking, and it depends what I'm doing. It's easier to do when I'm filling stuff in because it's a little bit more of just a slightly more automated. There's less thinking, it's just sort of doing the task. But it can sometimes lead to mistakes. Thank you, Notice Tas. I'm not sure what your username is referencing, if it's your name or something else that has an actual pronunciation. Sorry for maybe getting that wrong. I'm glad. I'm always worried that I'm gonna sound like I'm insulting people or mocking their name if I say it incorrectly or make assumptions. But I'm also used to my name being said a bunch of different ways. Not my username, but my given name. over halfway. Huh. Took acid one time and looked into a rock, and all you could see were 2D versions of those tiki dudes from Easter Island. I'm not sure where the term tiki comes from. But yeah, the large heads from Easter Island. It's easy to see faces in a number of things. There's an expression for seeing faces that aren't intentionally there, or seeing faces in objects. I forget what the term is, but that's something that I guess I play with a bit as well. I've never done any psychedelics, but my understanding for a lot of psychedelics is that it bridges connections in your brain that don't normally connect. And so it would make sense that you would start to see connections and see things you might not otherwise. To focus in and better understand, or better, not necessarily better understand, but to have an alternative understanding of something that you otherwise wouldn't recognize. Okay. Getting close to being done. And then I get to scan. don't know what my biggest inspiration is. I like a lot of folk and outsider art because it tends to be a little bit more instinctual. XKT. Getting very close to being done. that was not a great time to be married someone internationally and have I'm in a committed relationship, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. And it's flattering. I don't know that I've had any casual marriage proposals in recent times. I forgot that I need to put these in order. Okay. Now, oh wait, 1 second. Let me get in closer on this. There's good. Right? Yeah, that's a good position. Comfortable spot. Okay. Okay. Now we can start the scan. Hopefully don't have any issues like yesterday. Yesterday the scanner stopped working and I had to use my old computer. Come on. Yeah. Okay. Change this location. Live designs, 17, folder, 11-17-2020 underscore square spiral scans. Choose that guy and rename this. scan. It'll be a minute or two. $52 times a third. 51 times a third. It does divide by 3, doesn't it? It's 48. 51, 54. Yep. 17 will probably be. If I can get this tight, it'll probably be like 17 minutes of scanning. Right? I think that's right. Each one takes about 15 to 20 seconds to scan. I'm a little bit worse at getting it well timed when I'm live streaming because of the position that everything is placed in. I'm slightly less efficient when I'm scanning during live streams versus when I'm scanning otherwise. I'm doing okay. Thanks for asking. How are you doing? Hello, Punch. I'm scanning each of these guys. So what you're hearing is the mechanical elements that are moving the scanner bar across the flatbed scanner. scanning each one to create a digital photograph, and then put those in a sequence to create the illusion of motion. The paper is tracing paper. I forget the actual brand of this particular kind because I bought it in decent size bulk, like 1,800 sheets or something. Wait, 3,800 sheets. I still use the box, coupled with other things. And then I use a cheaper brush that's around the same size as a size 0 round brush. But it's not an official size. And I use Sumi ink, S-U-M-I ink. I get the paper at 9 by 12 and then I cut it in half. And then I punch holes into the paper. The actual peg board that I have is one that I made, which is why it's got more textural elements to it. And it's not like a perfect white because I painted it and then I let it dry and I was like, I want to use this now, so I didn't paint multiple coats, which I should have because the paint was kind of thin. Microns are good. They're predictable and do a good job of what they do. There's no reason not to use them other than you're finicky and weird about stuff, which is me. I've got a repeatograph pen, which is more expensive initially than Micron. Because microns are meant to be disposed of. They don't last as long as a repeatograph, which is has a refillable ink chamber. You can refill the ink. But they are also a lot more finicky and tend to have ink dry up in them, and it's a greater loss of investment if you don't take care of them, which I've definitely had issues where I don't take care of repeatograph pens that I have. Here's a repeatograph pen that I use most often currently. I'll show it more in a second. I want to keep scanning. This is the repeatograph pen. And it has a metal nib. And then an inkwell down. I could use these frames for hard enamel things. I don't have the equipment to personally do hard enamel works. And most places to make hard enamel pens have a minimum order of 50 to 100. And so it's a greater investment. It's like a couple $100 to get a good enamel pen, which I have some that I've made in the past, but they usually don't sell as well as I hope they will. And so it's more a personal investment into the item rather than an actual profit maker. They get more expensive if you're buying them not made in China. Where can you get good tracing paper? You can get good tracing paper online or in art stores. This is where I've made purchase of it. There are different qualities to the tracing paper. If you want like a hardier thing that functions like tracing paper but isn't as thin, is a little bit more robust, also more expensive, then you can look for vellum. V-E-L-L-U-M, I think is how it's spelled, unless it's Vel-M. But I think it's Vel-Um, which is usually a little bit smoother, and it's not what it's referencing. Traditionally, vellum is animal skin that's been stretched and treated as something of a paper before tree fiber, wood pulp was used for paper. Vellum was used, and that's what's in a lot of traditional medieval artworks for like things like the Book of Kells. It would have been done on vellum, or illuminated manuscripts. A lot of those are done on vellum. But that's not what, if you buy a pad of vellum at an art store, it's not going to be made of animal. It won't be animal skin. But tracing paper that I like, that's traditional vellum. That's like pre-paper. But that's not the tradition, or the current, what vellum is if you get it at a store. But it's a thicker and a little bit hardier of transparent paper. So if you're just looking for the transparent element and you want a higher quality one, you can get that. and it'll be a little bit more resilient than tracing paper. But you can get a solid pad of tracing paper for like $10 to $15 at an art store. It'll be a little bit cheaper if you get the art store brand. So if you're going to a place like Blick, then if you're getting the Blick brand, then it'll be a little bit cheaper. The more expensive ones, by a few dollars, tend to be Canson or Strathmore, which are both good paper companies. Trying to think if there are other ones that I'm familiar with. Canson, Strathmore, Faber-Castell, which they're probably best known for things like pastels and larger sheets of paper. I think that Canson might be an American brand. I'm not sure offhand. But those are the three brands that are probably most popular, well-known, and respected as far as accessible brands of paper that tend to be a little bit more expensive, but depending on your use, can be worth it. This tracing paper isn't as smooth as a lot of those because I bought it in bulk because I needed a lot of tracing paper. So I bought it in a thing of 3,800 sheets. And it's a different brand that only sells in bulk, I think. They don't sell in smaller portions. They don't really do wholesale, I don't think, because I tried to go to their website after finding it on a different site. But if you're looking at tracing paper, open up the pad, see how it feels, how smooth or rough it is. And if you're using it with certain stuff, it'll maybe be more resistant to pull in the ink, which can be advantageous or unappealing. Depends on your workflow and how you're making things. I'm almost to. Should start at 1. Rename these guys. Copy them so I don't accidentally lose them. Then pull up this one. Paste it in there. And give this one good old name. That's right, right? Okay, now let's open up Photoshop. Start importing these scripts, load files into stack, browse, open these up, and now I will go to display capture, start that, okay, and wait a minute because this is 52 sheets. Right now I do have piles of paper pretty consistently throughout my room. When paper comes in pads, it's a little bit more manageable. But I do have a generally messy room. It's not dirty exactly, but it is messy. Thank you, Chantal. Chantal. While that's loading up, I'm gonna be Malcolm. Let me get this water. I don't know that it's the most appealing. sound. Someone said cheese it ASMR. Someone said, do you keep your frames after scanning them? I do. Semi-organized. I have envelopes that right now I have just a general thing that's live stream November. And it's not as full as you might think. But that's because I skipped a week. So I got various stills in here. Back in the middle, just for my own sake. Some odds and ends of things. Oh, I finished. So let's create a frame animation, make frames from layers. For the moment, I'm going to do that. Speed, reverse frames, because for whatever reason it goes the opposite direction. Why did it do that? That shouldn't be that number. It should be right there. Actually, it should be right there. Are these in order? Yep, okay. Let's get a general placement of orientation, or boundaries rather. I'm going to crop this down. Just for this stage of things. Give us a minute. I'm planning on live streaming in December. I do. Someone asked if I like seaweed. I do like dried seaweed as a snack on occasion. I forget about it. Sorry for not responding earlier to your seaweed question. I don't have it that often, but I enjoy it when I do. That's a fine size. Save this. And this guy. Turn off display capture. I'm going to rename this file. Use GIF. Now let's get this going. Sorry, I just want to show this. Oh man, I didn't do the right speed. Okay, gotta redo this quickly. Where else? Come on. Okay. And there you go. Another question was, do you import all the photos into Canvas as layers? That is a setting in Photoshop. You can go, what is it for importing into layers? It's file, scripts, load files into stack. So if you want to pull a bunch of images into Photoshop, you can do it that way. File, scripts. Scripts is towards the bottom. It's like 6 up from the bottom when you're in the file section. And then it's 4 up from the bottom once you're into scripts to get to load files into stack. You can find scripts that are created that do certain actions. You can also do automate batches, I believe. Yeah, and you can create your own things. Like you can record a series of actions if you pull up the actions window. And you can create specific actions to apply to a large number of files and then batch edit things, which is very helpful if you have a bunch of photos that you need to apply stuff to. Okay. If you got any questions, feel free to ask them. This is pretty much done. Mouth rises up a little bit. There's a lot of little things that are happening at any given time that I would have been much worse at handling in the past, but I've gotten better at over time, thinking about how multiple elements move. Nothing really ever stays purely stationary, and how things are reacting is relative to their relationship to the movement. So it's more extreme at certain edges. Depends how you're working with it. Are you using a printer scanner? I'm just using a straight up flatbed scanner. I started off with a printer scanner, and those are ones that people usually already have. Depending on what brand you have and what software you're using to import the scans, you may or may not have more control over how the actual scan imports, like the exposure, how much it tries to correct things, stuff like that. I usually import bare minimum so that I have the most control over stuff when I'm actually working. So I actually have a pretty portable flatbed scanner that is a Canoscan LIDE 400. It doesn't require external power. It's powered entirely by USB. It's not the best interface because currently I have a MacBook that has USB-C ports. So I have to use a little USB-C to USB-A hub. But it actually works out okay because I have multiple things connected right now that are by USB-A, the square or rectangular guy, not the rounded oval. And so that works fine. This is 52 frames at 15 frames per second, so it's about 3.5 seconds long. Hello, Nicholas in Argentina. Welcome. Bienvenido. Bienvenidos. Hola. Willkommen. That's clicking. I never think about the amount of sound that I'm creating as I'm doing things, especially this guy. This is just a, wait, let me see what I'm actually looking at. It's just a knife that has a tightening mechanism, but it clicks. And I like messing with it, but it's kind of loud. Thank you, Chantal, Chant 4 Ale. I'm guessing that 4 is representing an A. Yeah. You guys have any questions? I'm running shorter on time because it's almost 7, which means that this is gonna automatically cut off for Instagram shortly. If there aren't any questions, then I will head out and prep this stuff for various platforms. How long have I been doing art for? More or less since I was born. More intentionally, probably since like middle school. 20 years? I don't know. But art full time, I went to college for art, so you could count that. And that was 2009. So like 10 odd years. Animation specifically, about 7. Because I didn't really focus as much on this sort of style of animation until my junior year of college, which would have been 2011, 2012. So I guess 8 years. A little bit more proactively. But art in general, I've been doing my whole life. My mom's an art teacher. My dad pursues art in some fashions. And so it's always just sort of there and encouraged, at least not discouraged. My mom definitely encouraged it. My dad did too. I was encouraged to do art. Any other questions, concerns, comments? If you're outside of the US, which it seems like a lot of folks are, and you're interested in purchasing something from me, DM me or email me at traceloops@traceloops.com. Typically, the price for a shirt internationally will be about $28. As opposed US, $28 US, and that includes shipping. And I set that up by doing a money request through PayPal, which you don't need a PayPal account to do it. And then I just place the order myself. It's a little bit more expensive for shipping, and there's some different international taxes. If it's in Europe, it adds about $5 of tax. And so I tack that onto the price because it's increased, and it also takes a little bit more time for me to facilitate it. So it ends up being about $28 US for shirts that are extra small to extra large. If you need a 2XL or larger size shirt, then the cost goes up a little bit more by a couple bucks. Not terribly much, but it's just a larger shirt with more fabric, so it makes sense. And it's probably technically a little bit more expensive to ship, but they do a flat shipping rate for the service that I use. If you have any other questions, concerns, comments, you can also DM me or email me, and I'll try to get back to you. If you want to watch this live stream in full or other ones, I upload them to YouTube. If you search TraceLoops, it'll pop up my channel on there. There's several, like a couple months worth of live streams there, and each one is at least 40 minutes long, or it might be one like this that's 4 hours plus. This one's going to end up being just about 4 hours. But so you have a lot of live stream that you can go back and look at if you're curious and want to see a real-time example of work that you were unable to view the live stream as it happened and are not satisfied by seeing the time lapses that I post in Reels and on TikTok. If you're curious or more comfortable viewing these things, not the live streams, but the time lapses and the final pieces, you can also view them on TikTok. Same username there. If for some reason you're still on Tumblr, like me, TraceLoops is the same thing there. I do have a Twitter, but it's not specifically art focused, and so I don't usually promote it. I just maintain my personal one so that it exists in that space. As long as there are no more questions, I will head out. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate you taking the time and just being a part of this process. It's nice. So I'll give it about a minute, see if there are any questions, because there's a delay between when I say things in my personal thing and when it goes out to Instagram, and then when you are able to type something up there. So I try to give it a sec. Just gives a weird dead moment or two. Because it could be just that no one's interested in asking questions, or that someone's typing out a very thoughtful question. I can't tell. Doesn't seem like anyone's got questions coming through. Okay, so if I do cut off before you're able to ask a question, DM me or something, or email me. I do international shipping. Just takes a little bit more effort on both of our parts, and you need to contact me directly, because that's how it goes. That's how it's set up for me right now. It might change eventually, but anyway, thank you all for watching. Plan on being back tomorrow. I'm going to wave like this 2 more times. Okay, adios. Where is that? It's right there. Okay.